Welcome! NOAA recently released its July of 2020 Global Climate Report, and this video is a summary of that report and other relevant climate data. Let's go over some of the things we're going to talk about today. July of 2020 was the second warmest July on record, second only to 2019 and tied with 2016. Now remember that 2016 was the height of the El Nino, which was one of the strongest on record. And we've been in ENSO neutral conditions most of this year. The hotspot in Siberia is still there. That may have something to do with the fact that we have the lowest Arctic sea ice extent on record this July. It's been a very active Atlantic hurricane season. But it's been a below average US tornado season, at least so far. Let's take a look at the temperature rankings in a little bit more detail. Globally, as I said, it was the second warmest with an increase over the 20th century average of 0.92 degrees centigrade. Land was also the second warmest. Ocean was the third warmest. Comparing the northern and the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere overall was the warmest ever recorded, with a deviation of 1.18 degrees centigrade from the 20th century average. The southern hemisphere was the seventh warmest, with an increase of 0.65 degrees centigrade over the 20th century average. This means we've had 427 consecutive months with temperatures above the 20th century average. Well, let's see how these temperatures are distributed around the globe. This is a map of the deviation from the average temperature for each one of these pixels. Blue indicates colder than average, red indicates warmer than average. And you can see that hot spot over Siberia is still there. It's been there for several months now. In contrast, Alaska and Western Canada are below average. There's also that persistent cool area off the southeast coast of Greenland, but the most interesting feature to us all probably is the area off the southwest coast of South America. That's there. This is the area that determines whether there's an El Nino or La Nina, and the intrusion of more cold water there indicates we're heading towards a La Nina, and that affects temperatures and climates all around the globe. Now that last map didn't show you which of those temperature deviations were actually records. This one does. This is called a percentiles map. On this map, record cold will be indicated by dark blue. Record warm will be indicated by dark red. And as you can see on this map, there are no record cold pixels anywhere. There are only 3 much cooler than average pixels on the whole map. Yet there are hundreds of much warmer than average pixels, and 134 areas that have set record warms for the year, particularly in Southeastern Asia and the Southwestern Pacific. Before I discuss this chart, I'd like to give special thanks to Jacob Murphy for pointing out some errors in my previous versions of this chart. I hope I got it right this time, Jacob. I'm sure you're going to check. What this chart shows is the ranking of each month out of 141 years worth of data for the average global temperature. And you can see that July of 2020 is ranked second of all, just behind 2019 and tied with 2016. This makes it look as though 2020 is going to end up being the second warmest year on record. The last 5 months of this year are going to have to be extraordinarily cold if it's going to knock it out of that particular spot. Which means all of the last 7 years would be the warmest years on record. So there's no sign of that coming ice age that we hear so much about from some people. Now we will move from looking at surface temperatures to the upper atmosphere. We'll start in the lower troposphere, which averages out about 4 kilometers in altitude. And according to the University of Alabama Huntsville, this was the warmest measurement for July ever recorded. And the overall trend for that particular level of the atmosphere is 0.21 degrees centigrade per decade, which is very similar to what you're getting at the surface. The mid-troposphere, which averages out about 7 kilometers, RSS has the only available data, and it too recorded at July as the warmest, with a trend of 0.15 degrees centigrade per decade. Now that is lower, and you would expect it to be lower as you go higher because the atmosphere gets colder as you go higher. Finally, the stratosphere, which averages out about 17 kilometers. Again, RSS has the data there, and it was the 26th coolest because it's actually a cooling trend that we're looking at. And so we have a cooling trend up there of minus 0.2 degrees centigrade per decade. Now that cooling trend is a unique signature of anthropogenic global warming. No other mechanism explains it. Next, we'll take a look at the sea ice extent in the Northern Hemisphere. And July of 2020 turns out to be the lowest extent we have seen on record so far, and the 20th consecutive year with below average sea ice. This represents a 23% loss of sea ice since the average established between 1981 and 2010. Now let's take a look at the Southern Hemisphere. In July of 2020, it was the 9th lowest sea ice extent and the 4th consecutive year with below average sea ice. Now let's take a look at carbon dioxide levels. Each month, of course, we're setting a new annual record because the amount of carbon dioxide is continuously increasing. In July of 2020, it was 414.38 parts per million. That's up 2.64 parts per million from last year. Now let's take a look at the all-important La Niña-El Niño cycle. For the last year or more, we've been in a neutral condition between El Niño and La Niña. But it looks as though we're slipping towards La Niña later this year. The models are still highly variant, so it's not altogether clear how deep this La Niña will be if indeed it arrives. We'll have to wait and see. But my bet is that we'll be in a relatively mild La Niña by the change of the year. So far this year in the United States, the number of tornadoes has been well below average. At the moment we're at 843 tornadoes compared with normally about 1,000. So after a fairly brisk start to the season, we've leveled off considerably. However, we should not get complacent. Tornadoes can come in relatively rapid bursts, and so we could very easily be back to normal or even above normal if there's a major tornado outbreak. In contrast to tornadoes, the North Atlantic has had a very busy hurricane season so far. There were 5 more named storms in July, 2 of which became Category 1 hurricanes. It's the first hurricane season with 9 named storms before August 1st, 6 of which impacted the US, which is also a record. The Pacific hurricane season has had 7 named storms, 2 of which became hurricanes, 1 of which was a major hurricane, i.e. Category 3 or above. So what conclusions can we draw from all of this? First, 2020 is still on pace to be the 2nd warmest year on record. We would have 7 record years in a row. And so neutral conditions prevail, but a La Niña is possible by the autumn. The Earth is still warming unusually rapidly. So until next time, stay safe and goodbye.